My name is Luke McBain. I'm sitting here together with my brother Chad McBain in Canada. I'm speaking from
Hi,
Germany. Hi, how are you?
pretty good yourself.
I'm uh, I'm pretty excited because we're getting into a topic which is not really that much my area of expertise, but it's more yours, and you have this absolute passion and yeah, years of background of getting into cryptocurrency and yeah, convincing me also to become more interested in that field. And I thought, well, I gotta get you to speak about that and to see why, how did you get into this whole thing and why do you think it's important and why should anybody care? Like, is this something the normal person should even be interested in, or is this just for geeks and investors and rich people? I guess we got to start from the beginning. How did you get interested in this whole cryptocurrency thing?
Um, I got into it, well, in phases, to be honest with you. I was listening to something on YouTube probably 6, 7 years ago now. And a gentleman by the name of Chamath Palihapitiya was talking about this internet currency called Bitcoin. And I was mildly interested in it, and he talked about it being kind of the way he phrased it, it was insurance against the collapse of the financial system as we know it. And so let's say 7 years ago, 2014, we were just a few years out of what was almost the collapse of the global financial system. So real estate is my career. I've been doing it for over 20 years. And so 2008, 2009 were things that stuck with me, fresh in my memory. So I was listening to him, and I remember Googling Bitcoin, and then I saw the price of it because I thought, oh, maybe I'll buy a little bit. And at the time, it was around $800 Canadian, which I think was probably around $500 or $600 US at the time. And I remember thinking, that's crazy. I would never pay that for some fake internet money. And that was pretty much the end of it. And then fast forward a few years, I guess 2017, late 2017, early 2018, when I think a lot of people at least first heard about Bitcoin was during its first run up, so to speak. Well, it turns out it wasn't its first run up, but it was the first one I think that caught national news. And it went to, I don't know, $20,000 US. And what fascinated me about that was there were people, I saw just regular people um, making good money on this. So I did more research, and that led to a journey. I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit hole, but it led to a journey of me um, just wanting to learn more about it, but also wanting to learn more about the financial system. And I'm not sure what came first. Um, I read a book called The Bitcoin Standard, which is available pretty much everywhere, Amazon chapters. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called The Bitcoin Standard. I read another book at the time, which had nothing to do with Bitcoin. It was called the Creature from Jekyll Island. And it was about the creation of the US Federal Reserve and, quite frankly, central banking in general. These are topics that in my life I'd never paid any attention to. And those two books, although they have nothing to do with each other, caused a light bulb to go off in my head that I just felt that um, the world that we live in, from a financial, political, governmental, corporate perspective, I don't think is what we all think it is from that perspective. I really started to get the impression that you had to be a little bit more savvy about your personal finances if you wanted to truly get ahead. Saving wasn't going to work. Some investing might work, but it might surprise you as to what was good. And what it really came down to is I started to have a belief that government should not control. And I guess the argument would be that central banks control the money, but at least in the Western world, it's actually government that then communicates to the central bank. And so therefore government through the central bank controls the money. And if that's the case, I don't know that the average person like you and I stand much of a chance in terms of building any type of security or wealth. Now, that's a lengthy conversation, but that's how it started. It started about 6 or 7 years ago. And then me just slowly, after reading a little bit and reading a little bit more and doing some more research, just slowly putting together that kind of the cards were stacked against most of us. And just quickly, I would say things like inflation is something I think we all know the word, but we really don't know the catastrophic effect it can have, not so much short term, but midterm and long term on our financial health. So Bitcoin became something I really started to pay attention to because it was out of the centralized control. It was out of the control of government, and not in a bad way, like not in a way to buy drugs or stuff like that, but just in a way that you and I could interact and have an exchange of a good for a service or whatever, without some intermediary like a bank taking a fee just for you and I to, for you to pay me for cutting your lawn. It's just something as simple as that. It just made sense to me. And when you think of the world that we've kind of grown into over the last 10 years, the whole gig economy, as they like to call it, a gig economy money made sense as well, an internet money, if you will. So yeah, long-winded answer, but I got into Bitcoin by accident and just really started to learn about the financial system at large. And the more I learned about it, the more Bitcoin made sense to me. Yeah.
And why is it not crazy internet money? Like what's what's the difference between Bitcoin and somebody coming along and say, oh, I invented this currency now and I'm going to call it Scrooge money or something like that. And you can
Yeah, I'm
buy
probably not the most qualified person to answer that, but one of my go-to responses to that question is, let's say for a second that it is crazy monopoly money. What helped me understand it better was not so much what is Bitcoin, but actually learning what is the US dollar, what is the Canadian dollar. I live in Canada for anybody that's watching. And when I realized that they were also not real in terms of money, then Bitcoin became much easier to understand. So what I mean by that is, for anybody that's never studied this, for 40 some odd years of my life, I guess I always thought that the amount of dollars in circulation was always backed by vaults of gold. If you're in the United States, it would have been Fort Knox, that if the government had $1 billion, they also had $1 billion in gold. And what I learned, and some people that might laugh at this, but I really didn't know this until a few years back, was that no currency, at least in the Western world, is backed by anything other than the government saying it's good. Which, if you live in Canada, the United States, Germany, Britain, okay, well, that's probably great. But if you live in South America, if you live in one of the African countries,
Lebanon right now, where
Lebanon right now today, absolutely, Argentina, Brazil, you quickly realize that just because government says it's good doesn't actually mean it's worth anything, depending on other situations. So Bitcoin, and again, I'm not the best person to answer this, but if we even go down the road of, well, it doesn't mean anything because it's not backed by anything, the truth of the matter is the money that you and I would exchange for a good or a service is also not backed by anything. So they're both on a level playing field. So that took me a bit to understand. But once I, again, did some reading and researched that, Bitcoin to me is very real, but it's no less real than the dollars that I have in my bank account that are backed by the Canadian government. So, and once I figured out that those dollars were not backed by anything, then really a country's currency is really backed by the faith of the people who put faith in so-called currency. So you could literally create currency out of nothing if everybody else was willing to trade you for it. So we've the last 600-700 years we've used currency in terms of maybe coins, or when we invented the printing press, maybe dollars. But before that, it was gold. Well, all gold is basically a chunk of metal or rock, diamonds. We could have traded cows, we could have traded milk, and people did. Currency has changed many times since societies have evolved. So Bitcoin to me is simply the modern version of a way to exchange value. And it's an internet type of money, if you want to call it that. It's code, but it's internet money for an internet world. It makes sense to me when I start to think about it in that sense, but the biggest thing is it's backed by the faith of the people that understand it. It's got a fixed supply. And when I came to the conclusion that our own currency, the Canadian dollar, if you will, not to pick on Canada, it could be any currency, is not really backed by anything either, other than the faith of the people, then they're actually on equal footing with one another. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the big difference that there's, as you said, there's a limited supply of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's something I learned later, but so Bitcoin is a fixed supply of 21 million. And again, because I'm Canadian, I'll use actually, why don't we use the US, because neither of us are American. The US dollar does not have a fixed supply. The Federal Reserve can create US dollars anytime they want. As a matter of fact, I think we've seen over the last 15 months, they've created about 7 or 8 trillion new dollars that didn't exist 18 months ago. And what that does is it devalues the dollars that were in existence. So we hear about inflation when I think right now the US is reporting about a 5% inflation increase year over year. By the end of the year, it'll probably be closer to 10. I believe it's much higher. I think I can prove that, but we won't get into that necessarily today, but let's just go with their own figures. If you and I work 40 hours a week for our dollars and inflation year over year is up, let's say 10%, then you and I are now working 40 hours a week, but we're only getting paid for 36 hours from the previous year in comparison. And when I started to make that connection, that inflation is actually, it's stealing time, because you and I, we're still working 40-hour work weeks. But if inflation has reduced the purchasing power of our money by 10% year over year, that means 10% of our time has just gone up in, I don't know, into the ether. It's gone. So our salaries haven't really changed, which means our 40-hour work week from 2019 or even 2020 that we were paid for, it's still the same, but we're only getting the purchasing power of a 36-hour work week. And that really hit home with me. With Bitcoin, because there's only 21 million, you can't have inflation. It's a fixed supply. They can't print more. So therefore, if we were paid in Bitcoin, if the price never went up 1 penny, what we got paid 40 hours of work for last year, what we could have bought with that would be the exact same this year. So last year, in theory, if Bitcoin hadn't gone up in price, we would have been paid for 40 hours and that would have bought X. This year, it would have done the same. In fiat, which is what our currencies are, they're called fiat currencies, we've lost 10% of our purchasing power year over year. The fact that Bitcoin has gone up, as we talk today, I think it's around 45, 46,000. So it's probably gone up 6 or 7-fold in the last 12 months, maybe 15 months. That's great. And I hope it continues to do that. But when I looked at it, it had more to do with, even if it didn't go up at all, it was a more stable way and fair way to transact with one another, between you and I or our neighbors, than using an actual US dollar or a Canadian dollar or whatever, because it didn't inflate away. The purchasing power would stay the same in theory. And I do believe that long term, that's what will happen with Bitcoin. I don't know it'll go to 100,000 or a million or whatever, but I do believe that eventually it will stabilize, and then it will become that true store of value where it's worth today what it's worth 10 years from now, what it was worth 10 years ago. I think right now, because it's so young, it's growing. So it's the value is going up. Yeah. But I love the fact that you can only have 21 million because no business, no corporation, no government, no bank can make more, which means that my 40 hours of work this year, it will be the same next year. And I appreciate that. I'd rather work 40 hours and get paid for 40 hours than work 40 hours and get paid for 36.
But be paid in Bitcoin then.
I would like to do that. I don't know that the world is ready for that in my business yet, but there are starting to be real estate transactions conducted in Bitcoin. Absolutely. And quite frankly, other crypto, but Bitcoin is obviously the one that most use. Yeah.
I think some people could be concerned and are concerned, and sometimes I'm also concerned in terms of, well, what are governments going to do about Bitcoin? So is this now a threat to their currency because it's free from inflation? Is this something where, people might say, okay, we don't want to deal with the US dollar anymore. We're going to take Bitcoin. We're not going to deal with the euro. So that might seem as a threat to governments everywhere, that they say, well, we don't want people paying in Bitcoin. We want them to use our currency. I think Turkey just did that, right? That's what Turkey didn't ban outright Bitcoin, but it banned the ability to purchase goods and services in Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah, well, try not to go down any conspiratorial rabbit holes, but I think that it depends on the philosophy of the government of the day, I guess, of that country. So if a government's primary concern is to control its citizens through monetary policy, then I think Bitcoin probably scares the heck out of them. I think if a government's main concern is the stability of the financial system within their borders, and therefore the ability to have equal opportunity in terms of prosperity for its citizens, I don't think Bitcoin scares them at all. So you could have a country like Turkey ban the purchasing of Bitcoin, but then you could have a country like Canada that has allowed, I think, 3 Bitcoin ETFs now. Now, I'm not comparing the two countries from a political standpoint, but one has decided that, well, we believe in technology and things do change. And look, I'm putting words in people's mouths, but this is my opinion on maybe how it's going. That maybe, the decision makers in Canada have decided that we like being in charge of our currency, but things aren't going that well, and we need to move forward with technology. And there's creative individuals out there that have come up with an infrastructure that seems to work. So we'll allow it within the confines of our financial system to a point. So not legal tender, of course, but we'll allow the trading of it, we'll allow the purchase of it, that kind of stuff. I think it's viewed more as an asset here, not a currency. So there's a financial regulatory structure here to allow it. But some countries would probably fear it. My opinion is those countries are probably in fear of losing some control over their citizens. You could have a country like China that's basically stopped the mining of it and thrown out the miners and basically said you can't use it to buy anything. But you could have a country like El Salvador that has said, listen, we've played the game with the current financial system for many years. We've used the US dollar. Inflation is killing this country. It's hurting our citizens. And they've now moved to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, So it's an interesting and fascinating thing to watch this stuff unfold. But no, I think some governments around the world do fear it. And I think others don't fear it at all, and some actually, I think, are really excited about it and are willing to embrace it. I don't think that's any different than anything, quite frankly. Some countries are more open to some things than other things, and that's the way it's probably always going to be, at least for the foreseeable future. So yeah, I think it can worry some governments, but I also think it can be exciting for some governments. And we've got maybe 190 plus countries now recognized in the world. Some will love Bitcoin, some will dislike Bitcoin, and many won't really have an opinion on it one way or the other. It's my
I think that's also sometimes confusing for a lot of people, that, you know, what is it now? Is it crazy internet money, which I use to, I don't know, do something illegal or buy illegal stuff? Is it a currency, or is it an asset class? And just like any asset, any other asset class, or just like, yeah, just like gold, or, you know, so.
Right.
And I think, yeah, you're already trying to make the distinction there that, yeah, well, it depends. It depends where you are. If you're in Canada, it's an asset. You can buy an ETF,
Right.
but you cannot buy an ETF in the United States, but you can buy Bitcoin.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and so each country, I guess, has to decide, you know, how it should be categorized. I believe long term, it will probably be more like gold in terms of how it's used. Is gold a currency in 2021? Some would say yes. I don't think so. I think it's a store of value. I think it's an asset. But could you use gold as currency? I don't know too many people that wouldn't take it. So it could be used. I think it's probably a bit of a pain to use gold as currency in this day and age, but it could be. Bitcoin, I think, is probably easier to use as a currency because it is digital. But I believe in terms of its classification, I think it probably fits more into, I don't want to say gold, but maybe a digital gold, gold in a digital format, you know, because of its fixed supply. Now, you know, people that like gold, some of them will understand that. Some of them might take issue with that analogy. But I would argue that Bitcoin is actually probably a better store of value long-term than gold, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply. There's no fixed supply to gold. There's a limited supply to gold, but it's not fixed. Every year they mine 2 or 3% more gold. If the price of gold goes to $50,000 an ounce, you can be sure that more people will want to get into the gold mining business. And so they'll start to come up with more gold. So gold is limited, but it's not fixed. Yeah. So I actually think Bitcoin is a long-term better store of value. And gold is, in an internet world, in a digital world, gold is very analog. You know, I can't send you gold right now without calling a truck, and they have to take it to the airport, and then they have to put it on a plane, and they have to ship it to you, and then it has to clear customs and all this other stuff. I could send you Bitcoin right now, and it would take maybe 3 minutes for it to arrive in your phone, and you can then place it into your wallet, so to speak. And so I liken it more to gold in terms of its property. Not from a mineral standpoint or anything, but in terms of its being limited or scarce. But I think it's much more usable than gold would ever be. But gold could be a currency. So could Bitcoin, is it a currency? Is it an asset? I guess it just depends on how people want to use it. While the price is going up, I don't think people are using it as a currency. But at some point, I do believe the price will stabilize, whether that's at 10,000, 50,000, 500,000, a million, I don't know. Once it stabilizes, then I think yes, it could be used as a currency very easily. But it's volatile, because it's growing. And I don't mind volatility when it goes from $1 10 years ago to almost $50,000 right now. Volatility that goes up over the long term, I'm fine with. You know? So I believe once it stabilizes, and I do believe that'll happen in the next 5 to 10 years, yeah, I think that a lot of people will probably use it as a currency. Until then, I think they'll use it as an asset. Yeah.
I mean, this year saw, or maybe even beginning of last year, saw a lot of developments, a lot of news around Bitcoin. A lot of people seem to be, getting more aware of it, want to have a piece of it, buying into Bitcoin. But still, there's this volatility problem, so that seems to scare some people off.
Yeah.
Other people say, "Oh, it's already so high. Now it's too late to get into Bitcoin." So yeah, if you see it as a form of speculation, I guess, then yeah, that might scare you off, because you see that those drops.
Yeah.
And like this year, we've seen Elon Musk make pivot on Bitcoin and crashing the market
Right.
because of his pivot, first accepting Bitcoin as payment and then saying, no, we don't accept Bitcoin as payment because of the ecological footprint it has, and we got to reassess that. And people panicked and got out, and we saw a crash.
Right.
But it sort of recovered since then again, more or less, almost.
Yeah.
It is recovering right now. But of course, if you look at that, this kind of up and down, that can scare people off. It seems like highly speculative, and yeah, then isn't that sort of like a paradox to say, on one hand, it appears highly speculative because you see those peaks and crashes, and at the same time, but you say there's a limited supply, so how to consolidate that?
Yeah, I think it does scare people off, when the volatility aspect of it. But I think it's kind of like, I'm not comparing it to real estate in any way, shape, or form. But what I would say is, it doesn't matter when you bought a home in the last 50 years or 100 years for that matter. If you held on to it, you did very well. There were times where if you sold it, you would not have done very well at all. But if you held on to it long term, you did very well. I think it's the same with the stock market. It's the same with most assets. Gold, as we were talking about. Bitcoin has been around for about 12, 13 years. I think when you look at it from that perspective, as it grows, it's going to be more volatile than something that's been around 100 years, like a real estate market, or hundreds of years, maybe like a stock market, or thousands of years like gold. Having said that, 25, 26, 27 years ago, I think there was a lot of volatility in the internet. Today, there's not much. I think technology moves much faster than what the type of evolutionary scale that we're all used to. So it's not going to take 100 years for Bitcoin to find stable ground. It'll probably only take a few more. Last I heard, and it was just this week, there was about 150 million people in the world that were now involved in Bitcoin, and it's going up by about 2 million people a week. So if that adoption rate continues, let's say for another 2 or 3 years, you're talking about probably a billion people within the next 5 years. But even if it slows, you're probably talking hundreds of millions of people in the next 5 years. I think that's where it becomes a lot more stable, but there's also less and less Bitcoin, to your point. So I don't know in terms of an asset appreciation perspective where we're headed, although there's many economies of scale that would suggest that it's definitely going higher and higher over the next few years. But I think the biggest thing most people should think about is not the price. I don't look at the price too much. I mean, look, you wouldn't be human if you didn't. But I look at it as an alternative financial network that's outside of control of federal banking system, that can't be inflated, and the value cannot be basically evaporated over time. When you hear governments, at least here in the West, in Canada, the United States, and I'm sure in Europe as well, where they say we're aiming for 2% inflation roughly every year, and everybody, including myself, is always, oh, okay, well, that doesn't sound so bad. But then you get to 50 and you realize that when you were born, your purchasing power, even at 2% a year inflation, has gone to zero from the dollar that you had when you were born. Because 2% a year over 50 years is 100%, right? So even something as small as 2% a year has evaporated pretty much all of the purchasing power of the dollar I was given for a baby shower. I would like to not participate in that on a regular basis. I would like my effort, my work, my hours, my time to be rewarded in something more stable than that. And you and I both know that it's not actually 2%. It's much higher than that. Over the last 50 years, it's not 2% a year. It's much higher than that. But let's just go with the numbers that they always aim for. It still evaporates the value of your money 2% a year, which doesn't sound like much year over year, but a decade later, you've lost 20% of the purchasing power of your money, you know? And when you equate money to time, we all have, we don't know how long we're here, but we know we're not here for centuries. We know we're here for decades. I don't want 20, 30, 40, 50% of my few decades to be taken by government fiscal policy, you know? So I look at Bitcoin as an alternative financial network, not necessarily one that's, you know, I don't want to take a libertarian's perspective of outside of the government, just one that's more stable, actually, in terms of long-term ability to maintain a very specific purchasing power, like people that like gold have been saying for many years, that gold is a hedge against inflation. I actually don't believe that that's true anymore, but I do believe that that was the case for many years. Yeah.
Now, when people hear that, oh, this is a type of code or technology, well, and seeing how fast technology develops right now, wouldn't it be possible that something else is being now invented right now which could replace Bitcoin, so that if you say, okay, well, this, what you're telling me makes a lot of sense, but it's in the end, it's a type of technology, and perhaps yeah, in the next year, something else will be developed, and that's a much better store of value, and we're going to see a great shift towards that. I mean, we already see now certain other cryptocurrency coming up, and Elon Musk, Dogecoin and other coins, and I don't know, there seems all sorts of coins going around now. So
there's I believe there's it's now north of 9,000 cryptocurrencies currently out there. So the short answer based on that is yes, absolutely, something else could come along tomorrow and be invented. The problem is twofold, in my opinion. Number one, whatever is invented, all of the cryptocurrencies out there that I'm aware of, well, I'm not going to say all, the vast, vast majority are not decentralized. In other words, they're not like Bitcoin because we know who invented them. We can go and say to that person, stop doing that or make more or whatever the case is. So the problem with a centralized type of technology or financial system, anything, is it's under central control. So somebody could always make more of, you know, you say Dogecoin, they can make more Dogecoin, you know, they could make more Ethereum, they can do all kinds of stuff. With Bitcoin, that person, if that person ever existed, is long disappeared. There's no more Bitcoin to be made. So the next invention that comes along would have to have the same property of Bitcoin, not in terms of the code necessarily, although that would have to be, but also on the fact that it would have to be anonymous. Nobody could claim it. So I don't see that happening because most people that want to get involved in creating a cryptocurrency want to then profit from that cryptocurrency. So they don't disappear into the wind. They say, I'm the creator of Dogecoin or whatever.
Or Tether.
Ether, you know, and they become, you know, wealthy. And if you know, we need more coins, they make more coins. If they want to get rid of some coins, they get rid of some coins. Bitcoin is just, it was made, it was put out into the world, and whoever created it disappeared. So I don't think another coin could replace Bitcoin based on it would require a tremendous type of person or team to be able to walk away from their own creation to allow it to grow or to die on its own accord. The second problem I see with something just coming along tomorrow and replacing Bitcoin actually has more to do with the network itself. You'd have to create something tomorrow that hundreds of millions of people would be willing to adopt in the next year or two. You know, as I said earlier, Bitcoin currently has about 150 million wallets, so 150 million people around the world currently using it, or at least owning it. That's a lot of people. So I think it's not easily disrupted at this point. The network is far too big to be easily disrupted. So, you know, could it be beta as opposed to VHS? Could it be MySpace as opposed to Facebook? I suppose anything's possible, but it's highly unlikely, you know, at this point, just because of the network effect. Yeah.
And we've seen the robustness of that now because of the events in China. So yeah, imagine a country like China kicking out their miners, but we didn't see much effect on the network or on the value of Bitcoin, and as you say, the belief of people in Bitcoin, and now we see it going up again. China is a huge player, and a lot of miners were working in China, but now they're not, and still the network persists. And
well, because it's digital, you can literally pick up and move. We don't even know how many of those miners were actually in the physical boundaries of China. We know that the mining equipment was, but we don't know where the miners actually were. And I would assume that some of those miners were in other parts of the world that simply had equipment in China. Well, you can go get the equipment if you want, or you can leave it there and shut it off and then move to any other country in the world and start mining. It's pretty simple. All you need is a computer. Now, picture gold, for instance. You're mining in a country and political winds change and they say, you've got to get your gold mine out of our country. You know, it would take you weeks, if not months, to shut it down and lay the people off and get the equipment and put it on trucks and ship it and get it set up somewhere else and hire new people. And you can do that in Bitcoin in 24 to 48 hours, probably, realistically. So it's really hard to kill that type of a network effect when the network is not stationary. The network is literally in the internet. So I think that's a positive thing for Bitcoin, where, as you pointed out, you know, big bad China and can basically take a hammer to Bitcoin mining, and within 3-4 weeks, all of those miners were set up somewhere else and mining fully. And the price of Bitcoin didn't really do much of anything. It's gone up since then, fairly substantially. Some people would say that it's actually been a benefit to Bitcoin, because one of the concerns about Bitcoin that Elon Musk pointed out was mining in a way that wasn't environmentally friendly. And, you know, again, I don't want to get political, but many people don't feel that the way that China produces electricity, more often than not, is environmentally friendly. So the Bitcoin miners were able to move out of an electrical grid that might not have been the most efficient to an electrical grid that was more efficient and more friendly towards the earth in the United States or in parts of Europe or Switzerland or wherever. I mean, El Salvador is apparently going to be using the leftover energy from volcanoes. You know, it doesn't get much better than that. So no, that goes back to your comment about governments as well. Like, just goes to show how powerful it can be when it's truly an internet-based type of system, where it doesn't really matter what a government feels in terms of its political policy. Bitcoin will continue to thrive and not survive and then thrive, because it doesn't need government political policy. It doesn't need banking. it just is. It's a weird thing where it's almost like the movie Tron, where it's this intelligence that's digital that just thrives on its own, you know. So yeah, I think that the network effect of it, and 2 million people a week adopting it, I think these are things that not only help it continue to grow, but pretty much nothing's guaranteed in life, but it's a pretty safe bet that it's going to be a very strong form of asset for now, for the foreseeable future. Whether people want to adopt it themselves is up to them. Do your research, but I think that it will continue to be the fastest growing asset class for the next 15, 20 years, because it's digital, it's internet based. And, people like you and I, we're in our 50s, we're having these conversations. People in their 20s and 30s, it's a much easier conversation for them because they grew up with the internet to begin with. You and I adapted into it. Maybe for people that are older than us, baby boomers, it might be even more difficult. I don't know. So you've got let's say you and I are kind of in the middle, Gen Xers. I think millennials and Gen Z can understand the idea of an internet-based technological money or currency much easier than the two generations that are older than them. And therefore, you would think that the adoption would be even greater as they start to get jobs and buy houses and get married and have children, So I think it's got a very fascinating future. Yeah.
What is it you like to, for people to become more aware of? You just, before we started to have our conversation, you told me the story that you met some people within social events and they were making fun of Bitcoin, and then you entered the conversation and just, dropped some facts and figures, and they were actually then very interested and not so dismissive anymore, and actually sort of like turned around and said, oh, we'd like to know more. So what would you recommend for anybody being interested in this subject to you already said, do your own research,
Right.
look into it. Is there a good way how to get involved as a normal person who lives off a salary or a paycheck, and who, like us, is not a huge investor or a capitalist or whatever you want to call these people who have bags of money sitting around, don't know where to go with it, but are more like us who, live from their income and have to really look at their savings and, what should I do with it? And should I buy a piece of property, or maybe I don't even have enough money to buy property. So, but I have some savings. So I'm concerned about that. So how do I deal with this Bitcoin phenomenon if I don't want to speculate? Of course, there's always people out there who love speculate and say, okay, I made $1,000 on Bitcoin last month. Well, whoopee. But so what's your recommendation just in general for these normal people out there who...
Yeah, I think for first of all, I am certainly in no position to give anybody financial advice, nor am I qualified. But as a regular human being speaking to another regular human being, when I say do your own research, like I said, there's a book called The Bitcoin Standard, which I think is a great place to start. There's plenty of videos on YouTube, but I would say that the vast majority of them are trash. They're trying to sell you something. But, there's, I'm just off the top of my head, I'm just trying to think. There's the Modern Investor channel on YouTube is a good one. TMI, the Modern Investor. Mark Moss is a good one as well. There's probably a couple more that I'm forgetting, but I'll remember for another time. The Bitcoin Standard, good book to read. But I think for most people, it's a question of, are you comfortable with the way things are going and things have been with the current financial system? Because we really don't have any say in it as regular people. And I'm not comfortable with the amount of inflation that's been going on over the last number of years, even before, what's going on now, where the inflation is really starting to hit home. I think all over Western countries, European countries, whatever. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with the fact that the value of my money is not what it once was, and continues to be devalued all the time. And I don't like the idea of it not being stable and consistent. So I don't think you need to put $50,000, $100,000 into Bitcoin. Why don't you start with $50 or $100 and just, try and build up that way if you want. Like I said, I wouldn't be using it as a currency right now, because there's a famous story about somebody buying a couple of pizzas about in 2010 or 11 with Bitcoin. And I think at the time they used, I think, 10,000 Bitcoin to buy 2 large pizzas. And now apparently those pizzas are worth somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 400 or 500 million US dollars for those pizzas. Now, I've seen the person that did that interviewed. They say they're fine with that, but I don't think most of us would be fine with that. So I don't think, while Bitcoin is growing, I don't think it's something that people should use as a currency necessarily, because I think you'd feel a little annoyed if you spent $5 at Starbucks only to find out that 5 years later you just paid $5,000 for your Starbucks coffee. So we'll see. But I think in terms of most people, do your research, make the decision for yourself. But I think that you don't have to put thousands or tens of thousands. Start with 5s and 10s and 20s and whatever normal savings, allocate 5% towards Bitcoin. I think that would be a very safe and pragmatic way to do it. And look, at the very least, it's a hedge against maybe whether it's the US dollar or whatever, devaluing, being inflated away. It's a bit of a hedge against that. It to me, it's like buying digital gold. I don't know too many people that can go out and buy $100,000 worth of gold, but they can probably buy $20 worth of gold today and maybe $50 next week and that kind of stuff. And that's how I would do it. And if you have more and you've done your research and you think you want to do more than that, go ahead. But having said that, there is a fixed supply. So, sometime do some research and see if it's for you. And it's not going to be for some people. There's no doubt about it. But I think there's a lot of people out there that they look at it and say, yeah, I'd like to have a fixed, stable form of money, a sound form of money that doesn't get inflated away or can be manipulated with, or, who knows what, and like I said, those places on the internet, whether it's The Modern Investor or Mark Moss, there's some good YouTube channels out there. Stay away from YouTube channels that say, my recommendation is this, and pay me and I'll give you more information. Stay away from things like that, But there's some good information out there for sure.
Yeah, well, it's good that you mentioned that, and I think that that also again that you repeat, well, you're not giving investment advice, and neither am I, and that's not the point of this conversation. I think the point of the conversation is just generally raise awareness of what this is, this phenomena which we're seeing, and why people are becoming more and more interested in it. And so I think that's really already very helpful, and to of course approach anything which is new also with a certain degree of respect and caution, and first to try to get to know what it's like buying a home, right? You sort of look into the market and you try to get to know what's important when you buy a home. And I guess that applies also for Bitcoin. You should just, look into it a little bit before you make any sort of decision. And
yeah. And also maybe a part of that process in terms of research and education would be to learn a little bit about what can happen to countries that lose control of their currency. So you mentioned Lebanon earlier. Go on YouTube, type in Lebanon financial crisis, and you'll see firsthand what can happen. Brazil, Argentina, places like that. These are all places with lots of people living in them, and their currencies got away from them, and people are really devastated financially when situations like that happen. And I believe that Bitcoin is the answer to that. But at the end of the day, people have to make up their own mind for themselves. Yeah.
I think that's a good closing statement for today. People have to make up their mind by themselves. Make this believe in individual responsibility. I think that's a good credo to have. And yeah, anyway, thanks for the conversation. I hope we can repeat this sometime or look at it again. And I think this was a great introduction into the topic. So yeah,
Perfect.
thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.